I knew trouble was brewing when I saw the pearl-white Lexus parked sideways across my driveway like it owned the land. It was early Saturday morning, and I had just fired up my Massey Ferguson tractor to get some work done on the back acre. But there it was, pampered, polished, and blocking my only way out. And of course, standing next to it with her arms crossed like a mall cop was Patricia Templeton, president of our lovely HOA and the self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac. "You can't use that tractor before 9, Silas," she barked, flipping through a clipboard like she was reading me my rights. "Noise Ordinance. Section 17-B. I cut the engine and hopped down. "Patricia, that ordinance doesn't apply to agricultural equipment. I already checked." "And you're blocking my driveway." She raised an eyebrow so high I thought it might fall off her forehead. "I'm enforcing community standards. You've been warned about using that eyesore in a residential zone," I laughed. "It's a tractor, not a meth lab, and again." "My driveway." She tapped her heel on the pavement. "If you want to talk about violations, I've got photos of your front lawn from last week. Grass was over 8 inches. I stared at her. "Did you measure it yourself?" "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "You're not moving that tractor until I say so." That was the moment I saw red. I didn't yell, didn't argue. I just walked back to the tractor, climbed in, and calmly set it in reverse. I angled it just right, dropped the loader bucket low, and inched toward her Lexus. She didn't move. Just stood there, arms crossed, probably thinking I was bluffing. I wasn't. 30 seconds later, that Lexus was flipped clean into the drainage ditch beside my property line. Not a scratch on the tractor. Her car looked like a crushed soda can with leather seats. Patricia's jaw dropped so hard I thought it might crack the pavement. "You've committed a crime," she shrieked. "That's destruction of property." I killed the engine and hopped down again. "Nah, just moving an obstruction. You illegally blocked a private driveway. And it's all on camera." I pointed to the pole-mounted security cam I'd installed last month after she accused me of harboring wild chickens. She spun around, fuming. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. You are done in this neighborhood?" I just grinned. "Make sure you bring your insurance. And maybe a tow truck." She stormed off, yelling something about legal consequences and community order. But I knew she was rattled. The HOA had been pushing hard lately: petty fines, surprise inspections, even trying to ban porch swings. But this was different. This was war. By mid-afternoon, the tow truck was hauling Patricia's Lexus out of the ditch while half the neighborhood watched from their porches, drinks in hand, trying not to laugh too loudly. The driver, a gruff guy with a faded flannel and a thick southern drawl, gave me a silent thumbs up as he winched the crumpled car up the slope. I didn't respond. I was already inside, reviewing the footage from earlier. My security system had caught everything from 8 different angles: Patricia walking up, blocking the driveway, refusing to move, and the precise moment the loader eased her car into the ditch without so much as scuffing the license plate. The audio was clear, too. I backed it up to a flash drive and sealed it in an envelope labeled "If Things Get Stupid." I didn't have to wait long. Around 4, a city code enforcement officer knocked on my door. Young guy. Nervous. Hair too neat for someone who probably spent his day dealing with overgrown hedges and barking dog complaints. "You Silas Boone?" he asked, clipboard clutched like a shield. "Depends. You hear about the tractor or the Lexus?" He blinked. "I, received a report from the Brookpine Trails HOA alleging you operated heavy equipment in violation of city noise ordinances and damaged private property." I leaned against the doorframe. "You read the report?" I did. "And you saw the footage?" He hesitated. "No, sir. Come on in." I sat him down, pulled up the video on my computer, and hit play. 5 minutes later, he stood up, cleared his throat, and adjusted his badge like it might fall off. "Well, from what I can see here, you were on your own property, and the equipment was being used for lawful agricultural purposes. The car was obstructing a private driveway, and the removal was unconventional but not malicious. Glad we agree, I said, handing him a copy of the footage on a second flash drive. Keep this. Just in case this turns into something bigger, he nodded, still clearly shaken. I'll file my report, but off the record. That was one hell of a move. The moment he left, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stepped onto the porch. Across the street, Patricia was pacing her front lawn in a tailored pantsuit that looked like it belonged at a corporate merger, not a subdivision with gravel roads. She was on the phone, gesturing wildly. Beside her, two HOA board members, Greg and Deanne, stood stiffly, pretending they weren't being dragged into her mess. Greg was a retired dentist with a passive streak and a lawn that looked like it had been mowed with scissors. Deanne ran a craft blog and once tried to ban Halloween decorations because they encouraged pagan imagery. Neither of them looked thrilled to be there. Patricia spotted me and marched over like she was leading a parade. "You'll be hearing from our attorney," she snapped. "You escalated a situation that could have been resolved peacefully." I took a slow sip. Blocking a homeowner's only exit is peaceful? She ignored the question. The HOA has voted to levy a special assessment for property damage and emotional distress. Really? I said, glancing at Greg and Deanne. And did they vote before or after Patricia threatened to make an example out of me? Greg shifted uncomfortably. Deanne looked at the ground. "You're not above the rules, Silas," Patricia hissed. "No," I said, "but I read them. And I know when someone's abusing their position." Her lips tightened. "You know nothing about HOA governance." "I know enough to file a formal ethics complaint with the state HOA Oversight Committee. And I know that using HOA funds to tow a personal vehicle off someone else's land without authorization, that's misappropriation." That stopped her cold. Her eyes flicked to Greg. "He's bluffing." Greg cleared his throat. "Actually, I think he's right." Now she looked panicked. "You're siding with him." "I'm siding with the bylaws," he said softly. Deanne, ever the opportunist, stepped back and pretended to take a call. Patricia glared at me. "You think you're clever, but you're just a bitter old man with a tractor and too much time." I grinned. "And you're a petty bureaucrat with a clipboard and a Lexus in the ditch." That night, I went back through the HOA's public meeting minutes, which I'd been downloading for months, ever since Patricia had tried to ban flagpoles taller than 6 feet. I'd noticed a pattern back then. She was slipping in new policies during off-schedule votes, deliberately avoiding proper notice periods. Worse, I found a line item labeled Administrative Vehicle Fund, which, according to the budget, had covered a $4,800 reimbursement for vehicular maintenance incurred during HOA business. I checked the date. It was 2 months ago, and the amount suspiciously close to what it would cost to replace a damaged front bumper and axle on a luxury sedan. I opened a new document and started typing up a complaint to the county auditor. If she'd used HOA funds to repair personal damage, that was embezzlement. And if she'd lied about it in the records, fraud. The next morning, I drove into town and handed the file to a friend of mine, Cassie, a paralegal at the county clerk's office. She looked it over, whistled low, and said, "You want this to go quiet or loud?" "Loud," I said. "Very loud." 3 days later, a letter went out from the county's Legal Affairs Division requesting immediate access to HOA financials for a formal review. Patricia tried to spin it as a routine audit. Nobody bought it. Greg resigned from the board the next day. Deanne followed, but not before posting a vague rant on Nextdoor about toxic leadership and tractor tyrants. The neighborhood was buzzing. People who'd tiptoed around the HOA for years were suddenly poking around bylaws, asking questions, forming small committees. I hosted a barbecue that weekend and more than 20 families showed up. Someone brought margaritas. Someone else started a petition to dissolve the current board entirely. By Monday, Patricia was barricaded in her house, curtains drawn. I heard she'd tried to hire a lawyer, but the moment they saw the audit notice, they backed out. I wasn't done yet. I filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Regulatory Board, citing abuse of power, misappropriation of funds, and multiple violations of procedural law. Each allegation came with documented proof dates, signatures, even screenshots of emails she'd sent threatening residents with fines for things like unapproved mailbox paint and excessively decorative gnomes. The board opened an investigation within 72 hours. 2 weeks later, a state inspector showed up in a plain sedan and started knocking on doors. Patricia tried to claim harassment. The inspector ignored her. When the final report came in, it was brutal. 6 confirmed violations of state HOA conduct guidelines, misuse of community funds, failure to provide adequate notice for policy changes, and my favorite, willful intimidation of residents through unauthorized enforcement actions. The state ordered her removed from office immediately. The HOA was placed under temporary administrative control until a new board could be fairly elected. At the next community meeting, I stood up and nominated myself. No one ran against me. 3 weeks into my new role as acting HOA president, my garage looked less like a place to store tools and more like a war room. Maps of the subdivision were pinned to corkboard, documents fanned across the workbench, and a whiteboard listed every pending repair, vote, and financial discrepancy. But the real gold was in the locked filing cabinet in the corner copies of every financial record I'd recovered during the transition, including some that had been mysteriously missing from the official HOA archive. I hadn't planned on running the HOA. But once the audit exposed Patricia's web of mismanagement, the residents turned to me, not out of admiration but desperation. I was the only one who had stood up to her and won. Still, I didn't trust that things were finished. That suspicion turned into certainty when Cassie called one evening. "You've got a real problem," she said. I was reviewing flagged HOA accounts and something stuck out. There's a series of transactions from last year maintenance contracts, landscaping, tree removals, all paid to a company called Evergreen Municipal Partners. "Never heard of them," I said, sitting up straighter on the porch. "Because they don't exist," she replied. I dug deeper. The company's address is a P.O. box in another county, and its listed owner is a shell corporation. But get this, the name on the incorporation documents, a Preston Templeton. I didn't recognize the name at first, but it clicked a few seconds later. "Patricia's son, bingo," she said. So Patricia had been funneling HOA funds into a fake company run through her family. That was no longer a case for the state housing board. That was criminal fraud. "Send me everything," I told her. The next morning, I drove down to the sheriff's office with a folder thick enough to break a table leg. I didn't go to the front desk. I went straight to Sergeant Mallory, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the force and a face like carved granite. We'd gone to high school together, though she'd been 2 grades ahead and had once tackled a kid in the cafeteria for throwing pudding. After an hour of going through the records, she looked up. "This ain't HOA drama, Silas. This is white-collar theft." "You realize how much money we're talking about here? Easily over 100,000, I said. "And that's just what we've found so far," she nodded slowly. "We'll need a search warrant." If those original records are still in her house, I want them before she decides to torch the place. By noon, 2 unmarked cruisers rolled down Magnolia Lane. I watched from my porch as deputies knocked on Patricia's door. She answered, still in a silk robe, as if she hadn't left the house in days. Her face didn't register surprise, just annoyance, like the police were Amazon delivery drivers who'd rung the bell too early. But when they showed her the warrant, she stumbled backward. One deputy stepped inside, the other held the door. In less than 15 minutes, they came out with 2 laptops, a banker's box full of file folders, and a large padded envelope that one of them handled like it might contain explosives. The neighborhood was quiet, not out of fear, out of satisfaction. People peeked through blinds, some recording on their phones, others simply watching with quiet vindication. No one came to her defense, not even Deanne, who had once described Patricia as the bedrock of community order. Later that evening, Mallory called. We found invoices forged with board member signatures, she said. Fake bids, duplicate payments, and she even claimed to have paid for services that were never performed. Your subdivision's been paying for monthly tree trimming. Know how many tree services we found? Let me guess, I said. None, not one, she confirmed, and that's the tame stuff. I waited. She was also using HOA funds to make payments on a second property, a lake house, in her son's name. That explained the mysterious seasonal board retreats she used to mention without ever inviting anyone. Is she in custody? I asked. Not yet, but the DA's prepping charges. We're coordinating with the state's financial crimes unit. This is going big. That weekend, I held a town hall meeting in the community center. Word had spread fast. The room was packed wall-to-wall retirees in denim jackets, young couples with toddlers on hips, even the reclusive guy who only came out to mow his lawn at night. I stood at the front with a projector and a stack of handouts. No speeches, just facts. Here's what we've confirmed, I began. The previous HOA president, Patricia Templeton, used her position to siphon funds through a fake company controlled by her son. We've turned over all evidence to law enforcement. She will be prosecuted. Murmurs spread through the crowd. No one interrupted. We're also missing nearly $40,000 in reserve funds. I've requested a full forensic audit. In the meantime, I've frozen all non-essential spending and suspended contracts with any vendors previously approved without full board review. A man near the back raised his hand. What happens next? We rebuild, I said, and we do it differently. I proposed a new committee, not just a board, but a rotating council of residents with term limits, open meetings, and mandatory votes on any spending over $500. I also pitched a community fund, independent from HOA dues, to pay for improvements like playground upgrades and neighborhood events. Voluntary, fully transparent, people clapped, not politely, genuinely. Not because they loved the idea, but because they were finally being treated like stakeholders, not subjects. The next morning, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Patricia had been arrested during a failed attempt to transfer property titles to a cousin in another state. She was being charged with 5 felony counts: fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, document tampering, and obstruction. It felt surreal. The woman who once fined a family for having a trampoline with unauthorized netting was now trading her silk robe for a jumpsuit and a holding cell. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Instead, I drove out to the west end of the neighborhood where the lots border open farmland. There, hidden behind a row of pines, was a neglected drainage easement that had flooded 3 times in the past year. Patricia had always claimed it was outside HOA jurisdiction, but the original plat maps told a different story. I sent a crew out the next day. They cleared it in 4 hours. The flood risk dropped to 0. That's what real leadership looked like. Quiet, steady fixes that made people's lives easier, not showy decrees about lawn flamingos or mailbox paint. A few days later, a boy named Ali, maybe 9 or 10, rode his bike past my porch and stopped. "You're the tractor guy, right?" I nodded. "My dad says you're the reason we're getting the basketball hoop back." I smiled. "Your dad's right." He gave a thumbs up and pedaled off. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching lights flicker on across the neighborhood. Not a single one belonged to Patricia. Justice had done its part. Now it was our turn. 2 weeks after Patricia's arrest, the county court issued a formal seizure of her lake house. Preston Templeton, her son and the invisible hand behind the fake contractor scheme, had tried to file an ownership injunction, but the judge dismissed it in under 5 minutes. Fraudulent assets couldn't be shielded under family ties, especially when the paper trail was as clean as the one Cassie had assembled. The court named the HOA as an injured party in the restitution case, and suddenly, our small subdivision was staring down the barrel of financial recovery. It wasn't just about clawing back the money. It was about making sure nothing like this could ever happen again. At the next board meeting, our first fully open one held in the library's community room, we voted to place all financial operations under third-party management. A local CPA firm took over, with every transaction logged in a public ledger accessible through a password-protected resident portal. I insisted on that last part. No more hidden fees. No more discretionary maintenance lines on the budget. I'd expected pushback, but the residents surprised me. Even the most private among them had grown tired of secrets. That's when Martha Alvarez stood up. She was a retired ER nurse, lived 2 doors down from Patricia's old place. Nobody had heard her speak at a single meeting in 5 years. But now she stepped forward with a stapled packet and a purpose in her eyes. "I found this in my mailbox 2 days before Patricia's arrest," she said, holding it up. I think she meant to intimidate me. It was a list. Names, addresses, annotations. Nearly every homeowner in the subdivision was cataloged with handwritten notes in the margins. Things like refuses to trim hedges, opposes fence height limit, and odd husband possible pot smoker. Pages and pages of surveillance-style notes, all in Patricia's unmistakable cursive. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered a curse. "Why would she do this?" asked a young guy near the back, arms folded. "She was building a case," I said. "Real or imagined, probably planned to use it to control dissent." Martha nodded. "She once warned me not to get too loud about her tree removals. Said she knew what my husband really did on weekends." "Was she right?" someone asked. "No," Martha said, "but that's not the point." We voted to hand the list over to the county prosecutor's office. A week later, I got a call from Assistant DA Karen Yates. "I think we're going to add unlawful surveillance and intimidation to her charges," she told me. "We're also opening a civil rights investigation." The case was growing legs. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was undergoing its own quiet transformation. Without Patricia's constant interference, people began reclaiming their homes. Lawns took on character again, not chaos, just individuality. A couple down the street repainted their house a deep navy blue, something Patricia once claimed clashed with the subdivision's energy. Kids started riding bikes in groups again. One family installed a handmade bench beneath the oak tree on the corner lot, with a plaque that read, "Sit a while." But the biggest change came when we received a letter from the county zoning department. Turns out, Patricia had been filing anonymous complaints for years, not just against our neighborhood, but surrounding ones too. She'd been posing as a concerned citizen and nudging enforcement officers to issue citations for everything from unauthorized chicken coops to garden sheds built an inch too close to the fence line. The county was furious. Her false reports had cost time, resources, and in some cases, legal fees for innocent homeowners. They issued a formal statement clearing all pending violations tied to her submissions and offered a hotline for anyone who wanted to file a grievance. That's when I got an idea. "Let's hold a town hall," I said at the next board meeting. "Not for HOA business, for healing." We called it the Backyard Reboot. It was half potluck, half story circle, held on the community green. People brought folding chairs and homemade dishes. Someone set up a projector for old movies. But the real event was the open mic. One by one, neighbors came forward and shared what they'd been through. A widower explained how Patricia had fined him for leaving his porch light on past midnight, even though it was for security after a break-in. A teenage girl admitted she'd stopped hosting friends after being accused of violating quiet enjoyment rules during a birthday party. Even Greg, the former board member, took the mic. He looked 10 pounds lighter and spoke with a quiet shame. "I didn't know half of what she was doing," he said. And when I did start to suspect, I told myself it wasn't my problem. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. People clapped. Not for the apology, for the honesty. The event ended with an elderly couple unveiling a handmade wooden sign they'd carved together. It read, "Welcome to Brookpine, where neighbors still mean something." We mounted it at the entrance the next day, then came the trial. It wasn't televised, but courtroom sketches made it onto the local news. Patricia, dressed in a beige blazer 2 sizes too large, sat stiffly as evidence was presented. The prosecution laid out the entire scheme: the shell company, the forged invoices, the surveillance logs, the misuse of funds, the intimidation tactics. Her defense attorney tried to cast her as overzealous, a passionate community leader whose dedication may have crossed a line. The judge stopped him mid-sentence. "There is no passion in theft," she said. "There is no leadership in fear." The jury took less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The restitution order was generous. Patricia's assets would be liquidated and dispersed proportionally to the HOA and affected residents. But the real victory was the injunction. She was barred from serving on any homeowners association board in the state for life. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse with Cassie and Sergeant Mallory, who'd come to see the verdict firsthand. Cassie glanced over and said, "You know, this started with a car in your driveway." "And ended with a criminal conviction," Mallory added. "Not bad for a guy with a tractor." Back home, I parked the Massey Ferguson in the shed and locked it up. Not because I wouldn't need it again, but because, for once, there were no battles to fight. The neighborhood had found its footing. One evening, I got a letter from the county commissioner's office. They'd heard about our reforms, our open financials, our rotating council, our public transparency model. They wanted to feature Brookpine in a statewide HOA reform initiative as an example of what governance could look like without power hoarding or secrecy. I agreed on one condition. "We won't be a mascot for good PR," I told them. "If you want to feature us, include the whole story." The mistakes, the cover-ups, the arrogance, not just the redemption. They agreed. Weeks passed, then months. The green filled with kids again. A new slate of residents joined the council. I stepped down from the presidency but stayed on as a voting member. It was time to let others lead. One morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch, a neighbor strolled by with his golden retriever. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't flipped that car?" he asked. I looked out across the street where Patricia's old house now stood vacant, a for sale sign out front. "No," I said, "but I know what wouldn't have happened." He nodded, gave the leash a tug, and walked on, and just like that, life continued, not under control but in cooperation, the way it should have been all along.